Hi, you're welcome to The Point of View. The Point of View is our favorite current affairs program on television. On The Point of View, we select the right topics, get the right guests, ask relevant questions, and we often leave you with insight. My name is Selom Adunu, sitting in for a regular host, Bernard Koku Abler. Tonight, we are looking at efforts government can put in place in order to cut down expenditure and then reduce its expenditures. So our special focus tonight is on a report by the CDD, authored by the CDD, titled Proposals for Reducing the Size and Cost of Running Government. Report authored by Kojo Pumpuni Asante and David Asante Dako of the CDD. You can join a discussion as always via our WhatsApp line 020-444-7033. 020-444-7033. I'll take a short break. I'll return, introduce my guests, and then we'll get a discussion underway. Once again, you're welcome to the program. You're welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight, we are looking at how we can help government save the public purse and also the cost of running government, how we can help government reduce the cost of running government. The focus of tonight's discussion, or the document we are using tonight, is a report by the CDD titled Proposals for Reducing the Size and Cost of Running Government, authored by Kojo Pumpuni Asante and David Asante Dako. So that is our discussion for tonight. To help me do the discussion is one of the authors, Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante, Director of Advocacy at the CDD. Also, I have Samuel Bequin, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Extractives and Development Africa. These two gentlemen will help me help us appreciate the issues and how we can help government reduce the costs of running government and, of course, the size of government. Gentlemen, you are welcome to the program. All right, let me start with Dr. Asante, since you are one of the two authors of this document. Can you tell us what actually motivated this paper? If you can help us appreciate what motivated you authoring this document, and then what this document seeks to achieve. All right, so we're trying very hard to get our guests to hear us, but even as we do so, the introduction of the document says that it is an uncomfortable fact that the current sovereign debt crisis in Ghana, the worst in the country since the year 2000, has visited severe economic hardships on the citizens. For 18 months, beginning June 2021, year on year, rates of inflation in the country have risen consistently from 40.4% in October 2022 to 50.3% in November 2022, and finally to 54.1% for December 2022, according to the Ghana Statistical Service. This has heightened the urgency of prudent management and fiscal discipline by the country's economic managers. The report goes ahead to say that in a situation where the country's access to capital markets are closed, expenditure cuts are inevitable, and the government must lead by example. So this report essentially seeks to point government towards a certain direction, a direction of cutting down the size of government and also cutting down the cost of running government. It continues to say that on October 26, 2022, barely a month before the reading of the country's annual budget for 2023, the Citizens Coalition, a coalition of leading CSOs and prominent Ghanaians, held a press conference at the International Press Center to share its deep concerns about the deteriorating economic conditions and government's tepid response. It says that at the press conference, the coalition listed a number of demands, including the urgent need for government to undertake morale-boosting and confidence-building measures, like a long overdue reshuffle and reduction in the size of government. They also say that specific actions that were recommended include cutting the size of the ministerial team, reducing the number of presidential staffers, absorbing the secretariats of flagship projects within the ministries, departments, and agencies, reviewing state-owned enterprises expenditure on personnel, a ban on the importation of high fuel consumption vehicles, in addition to measures already announced by the government. So it says that it appears that every other sector of the economy has had to incur substantive inconvenience or financial loss in efforts to return the sovereign debts to levels that are sustainable. Every other sector of the economy except government itself. So the report is trying to say that it appears every sector of the economy appears to be suffering some cuts or some difficulty or some inconvenience. The only part that has remained the same is the size of government or government itself. It seeks to say that government itself doesn't appear to be smelling the coffee. The size of government is the same. The cost of running government is the same. Perhaps the operators or actors in government may think differently. But for now, that is what the report says, and that is the view of the CDD. So the report also looked at the emoluments of ministers and deputies. So, for example, it made reference to the Professor Yah Ntiamu led Presidential Committee on Emoluments 2020. And as you may well know, the Presidential Committee on Emoluments sets the salaries and general emoluments of ministers, deputy ministers, MPs, etc. So it makes a comparison between what the appointees earned in 2016 and then in 2020. So, for example, the president himself earned 29,899 cedis in 2016. That was upgraded to 35,520 cedis in 2017. In 2018, the president earned 39,072 cedis. 2019, 42,979 cedis, and then 2020, 47,277. It goes on and on. It talks about that of the vice president, cabinet minister who is an MP, cabinet minister who is not an MP, minister of state who is an MP, minister of state non-MP, regional minister MP, regional minister non-MP, deputy minister MP, deputy regional minister MP, deputy minister non-MP, deputy regional minister non-MP. So it does all of this and does some analysis to say that if you reduced the size of government, or if you reduce this number to a certain number that it suggested, you could save a lot of money. Per its computations, the total salaries received by government officials or ministers and deputy ministers using the 2020 rates quoted in the report suggested that, for example, said the combined monthly salary of each of the 20 cabinet ministers who also happen to be members of parliament is 665,400 cedis. That's monthly. That of the 9 non-MP cabinet ministers amounts to 295,488 thousand cedis. Yes. The monthly salary for one minister of state who is also an MP is 30,000 cedis, 30,644 cedis. The combined monthly salaries of 34 deputy ministers who are also MPs is 977,840 cedis. That of 5 deputy ministers who are not MPs comes to 137,895. So it says that in a year, the combined salaries of 20 cabinet ministers at 2020 rates, that's the rate from the Professor Yah Ntiamu Presidential Commission on Emoluments. When they use those 2020 rates, the annual salary of the 20 cabinet or the 984,800 cedis, while that of 9 non-MP cabinet ministers amounts to 3,545,856. What it does essentially is to say that we have 86 ministers. So out of the 86 ministers, 20 of them are cabinet ministers, or 20 of them are ministers who are not ministers who are MPs. 9 of them are MPs, are ministers who are not MPs, you know. And then we have 1 minister of state who is also an MP. And then we have 5 deputy ministers who are not MPs, 34 deputy ministers who are MPs. And as you may well know, the salaries of MPs and ministers are slightly different. You know, the MPs earn slightly lower than the ministers of state. So the argument is that when you put everything they earn together annually, it comes to 25,287,204 cedis. That is about 25.3 million. That is what the ministers and the deputy ministers and all of these guys earn every year. And so you multiply that by 4, you get to a lot of money, which we will come to. So it also talks about other, you know, perks of their office. So we talk about office accommodation, residential accommodation, security, transportation, overseas travel for business, official business, medical and dental services, including health insurance and other benefits. So when you look at residential accommodation, for example, according to the Professor Ya Ntiamoa-Boadu committee, persons or ministers who opted could be given accommodation, but they could also opt for 20% of consolidated salary in lieu of housing. So when you work out all of that, the total cost to government in terms of the accommodation of these persons comes to 5,057,430. That is quite a lot of money. So again, the ministers who are MPs, 20. Ministers who are not MPs, 9. Minister of State who is an MP. And so the Minister of State in this case is the Minister of State at the Works and Housing Ministry. As you may recall, there were 2 ministers of state, 1 minister of state at the Finance Ministry, Charles Eduboahen, who was later relieved of his position due to that expose by Anas about a month or so ago. So we have just 1 minister of state in government now, and that minister of state is Freda Prempeh at the Works and Housing Ministry. So I have Dr. Bumpude Asante. I think his line is better now. We can now go to him to let us appreciate really what motivated the authoring of this particular report. Dr. Bumpude Asante, thank you so much for joining us tonight on The Point of View. Why did you put this report together?
Thank you, and good evening to all your viewers. I think that since the beginning of the financial crisis, there's been a lot of discussion as to, you know, how do we basically deal with the recovery plan. There is talk about problems with revenue mobilization. So all the tax measures and issues raised about not having people not paying taxes and all of that stuff. We've had that conversation, and people have shown also, like, you know, Imani and others have shown very clearly that actually your biggest problem is the expenditure. And if you begin to look at some of the issues around contracting and so on, there's so much we can save if we were doing serious value for money. Now, one of the areas where there's been discussion about expenditure has been the size of government, and basically the cost of running government. I don't think anybody has really sat down and tried to put together the numbers around the cost of running government. You know, you look at the budget and you see, you know, sort of basic costs, but, you know, try to put it together and ask yourself, you know, what exactly does it cost us as Ghana to run the machinery of government, and what do we really get out of it? And people show all the time that it's a lot of waste. in terms of the numbers, whether it's ministers, staffers, all of that stuff. But it's so difficult to get information to put all of this together. So we thought that actually the minimum we can do is at least start with the ministers. If we're saying government should cut down on the size of government, cut down on the ministers, all of that, but how do you do it? How do you do it? What ways in which? And we thought this was like the most pain-free version that you can get, because some of the proposals we made for us does not really make any serious sort of surgery on the actual structure of ministries and so on and so forth. So the motivation was really to just give an inkling as to how can we get this process started. And one very basic way of doing this is to sort of take this approach and rationalize some of the ministries and reduce the number of deputies and so on and so forth. Because we are indeed in a crisis. And the only way you're going to balance your equation is either you reduce your expenditure because you don't have enough revenue to match your expenditure, and then gradually you build enough revenue so that you can expand your expenditure later on. So that's the motivation. It's really to make a very more substantive conversation about the urgency to really not do business as usual, to really begin to make some real changes to our expenditure patterns. So I'm hoping that the conversation is going to generate and give us some ideas about how we can go about reducing the size of government.
So what's your idea about the rationalization of this number? So we have about 86 ministers now. What's your ideal number? Where should we reduce it to?
Yes, so there have been, some people have said, well, compared to other countries, you can have 40 ministers. I think people have thrown out that you can have 50 ministers. So the sense was, okay, let's look at the ministries, because I think in terms of our practice, some ministries have become sort of important and relevant, right? And if you are going to do some serious rationalization, then you have to think more deeply about how you merge them so that you don't lose the essence of the ministries. The problem we have generally with the creation of ministries is that it is left to the discretion of the executive and the presidency. We don't have legislation to actually set out ministries and so on, so that even if somebody comes and wants to create a ministry, because with all its attendant costs, they have to go through a much elaborate process than just an executive fiat. But we don't have that. So, somebody can come make a political promise and say, I've created a ministry for it, and then it comes with all this cost. So I think our sense was that, okay, we shouldn't think of it in abstract terms. Yes, you can take the approach of just saying, okay, we need 50 ministers and deputies, and then go for it and then see what you can rationalize. But we looked at the ministries and said, okay, like you have 16 regional ministers. Now, that is a creation of the expansion of regions, and it's very difficult. For instance, so almost 16, you have to deal with 60 ministers that in the past maybe they should have been 10, right? And then we go through and we saw that, okay, there are some ministries that really should not be ministries. Ministry of Railway, the function of railway can easily be incorporated back into transport. Ministry for sanitation and water resources, you can add sanitation to environment, water resources, to environment. You can, there's a ministry for public enterprises or private enterprises. You don't need a ministry necessarily to deal with that. So those ones were easy to say, these were created with a purpose in mind. In a time of austerity, you can absorb these things, these functions, into many other ministries that are already set up. Agric is there, fisheries and aquaculture. You know, you can absorb that. So that was the approach. And once you did that, you were able to reduce the number of ministries and therefore the number of ministers, and then you can then tackle deputies. And in some cases, you have 2 deputies, 3 deputies, and you just reduce every single ministry to 1 deputy. And at least you begin to sort of have these numbers, reduced. So that was the approach. But as I said, for you to do a much stronger surgical, sort of process of reconfiguring ministry so we can reduce them even further, it needs some thinking through to make sure that they are, compatible and they can be absorbed properly.
All right, so I realize that about 4 ministries you said could be either scrapped or subsumed under others. Yeah. Special mention of the Ministry of Railways, for example. How about focus, the focus of a particular administration? So, for example, we know this government or this president has said that he wants to change the transportation architecture of the country. He wants to ensure that railway becomes a major part of our transportation mix. How about that focus? Wouldn't it be too much subsuming that function of railway and its construction and everything under another ministry which is already burdened with its sector matters? Will it give it the necessary focus and attention that government intends to give it?
No, I think, and that's where I think we've made really serious mistakes. I think the form, we focus too much on form rather than substance. And we can have conversations about the development, what they call them, under the 1 million one constituency, the development agencies like the Northern Development Agency and so on and so forth, where you basically create sort of redundancies. You have an RCC, a regional coordinating council that's supposed to coordinate, multiple districts, and therefore, if you want to pursue an economic development agenda that straddles different geographical zones and even districts, you have the RCC there to do that coordination for you. But now we've created another development agency that is underfunded. It's not able to do that job. But you have people there that you are paying, and then you are paying for stationery. So we start off, I think, in the wrong. A president's focus, a president's sort of pet project or a party's focus has to be in terms of substance. You want to build railways. Even, how big an office do you need? If it's still at the transport ministry, I think you have transport minister. And because also in these days, it's not maybe even just these days, you are thinking of integrated transport, systems. So the railway goes to somewhere. It moves people from one place to the other. They are connected to a road network. They are connected to airlines, whatever it is. So this idea that somehow, once you have a minister, that is what is going to deliver the agenda for you, has proven to be wrong. I mean, the president didn't create a ministry for FSHS. And yet, FSHS gets its funding, and it's been pushed, the agenda has been pushed, and so on. So I don't buy that argument, and I think we've had so many examples that has shown that these things don't work because we go with form, rather than focus on the substance. But the point is that it is at a huge cost to the taxpayer because we waste money. Every time you set up a ministry, you have to have departments, you have to have directors. It's almost standard. So you have to do all of those things even to be able to, transact business. And that is problematic. So I think that if we're going to learn any lesson from this crisis, some of this behavior that we are used to doing has to stop. But for me, it seems like we just want to eat our cake and have it. We want to continue doing the same things we are doing and expecting that somehow we'll have change.
I see. All right. So, this is the point of view. We are dealing with the subject of government size and the cost of running government. The report we are using has been, we're doing this with the report from CDD authored by Kojo Asante and David Asante Daku. Kojo Asante is our guest, and then Samuel Bequin is also our guest. He's Executive Director of Center for Extractives and Development Africa. The report thinks that some 4 ministries, for example, could be subsumed under other ministries, and that instead of having 86 ministers, we could easily have 50 ministers and still get the job done. Is this feasible? How about the bigness of the problem? Shouldn't the bigness of the problem require more hands? We'll take a short break. When we return, we'll look at all of that and see if other things like cutting down wastage in other parts of government, like the MDAs, for example, could be focused on rather than the numbers as in the executive. We'll also deal with Mr. Bequin on the feasibility of all of this. We'll return shortly to continue the discussion. Don't go away.
Pepsodent is aware that globally, 1 in 2 children suffer from cavities. That's why by giving her Pepsodent, you're not only protecting her teeth, but also helping her grow up and thrive at every stage of her life with a healthy and confident smile, so she can succeed and achieve all of her dreams. Because every smile matters.
Welcome to Jamila Home, a signature business that houses the most luxurious antique and contemporary furniture. We stock presidential, royal, ministerial, and executive furniture with complimentary decor. We have a wide selection of beautiful with one of the largest stood for England's finest craftsmanship. Italian contemporary Versace royal set in absolute 0302 4355. Okay. Room in Ghana and the world.
Come. Yeah. Real estate gaming plan and a chance of winning a house or cash or consolidated prizes such as saving. Buy a ticket to enter the game. Wait for the end of the game to enjoy the win. Anyone can win. This advertisement has been vetted and approved by the Gaming Commission of Ghana. Play responsibly, not for persons below 18 years, and gaming can be addictive.
You're welcome back to the point of view. We are looking at some proposals made by the CDD to government in a paper of how to reduce the size and the cost of running government. As you may well know by now, we are in an economic crisis. Government is finding ways of making our debts sustainable. There's a debt exchange program which is inviting bondholders to exchange their bonds for new ones, all in an attempt to bring our debts to sustainable levels so we can benefit or properly qualify for the IMF assistance we are seeking. The CDD is saying that whilst we're doing that, haircutting and all of that, government can look at itself and cut down the number of ministers and deputies, and also cut down on the number of ministries. So, for example, they say the Ministry of Public Enterprises should be dissolved. Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, or Sechi Mesaboso's ministry, said it should be dissolved. Ministry of Railways, Peter Amewu's ministry, also should be dissolved. It also says that Ministry of Fisheries and Aquaculture Development should be reintegrated with the Ministry of Agriculture, because indeed that is where fishing belongs. It belongs to Agric. Ministry of Sanitation and Water Resources. The CDD says that it could be integrated with the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology Innovation. Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology Innovation can be integrated with the Ministry of Communication. Interesting. I was thinking that communication and information should rather be going together, and then maybe sanitation, water resources could go back to local government, because really that is where the sanitation and all those matters belong. But of course, various views. But what is important is that the number they think is huge, and that should be cut down. Let me go to Samuel Bequin, Executive Director of the Center for Extractives and Development Africa. Mr. Bequin, welcome to the program. I don't know if you've looked at the document, but from all you've heard so far, what's your thinking around this proposition by the CDD?
Thank you, Salom. I hope you can hear me, and good evening to all your viewers. I think let me commend Doc and his colleague for coming out with this particular paper. Over the last year, as you mentioned, civil society groups met, and they had anticipated the potential economic difficulty that was, ahead of Ghanaians, and government was propagating the need for burden share. Unfortunately, that had not reflected in the budget presented, and that had not reflected in certain government actions. So this paper is trying to provide policy options for government to consider, even though there are some comments I would want to make as well. So let me comment them. First of all, I think there is the need for sometimes government setting up a ministry with the aim to focus on certain policy area. The overall aim or overall role of ministers are just to participate in policy decision makings, particularly at the cabinet level, and also defend certain programs that they may have introduced as well. And so with that particular background in mind, we should know that the aim for setting up certain ministries that have been suggested by the paper to be dissolved was to ensure that there was either much attention or to achieve certain objective by the president or the government. The context of these suggestions is that we are in economic crisis. Currently, government is asking certain people to cede their revenues, to cede their investment for the government for some time as part of contribution to us being able to get out of this crisis. So this paper is suggesting the dissolution of this ministry. I think that all the suggestions they have made are very feasible. First, it is saving us, not that much, around 8 million Ghana cedis per year, based on the proposals in the paper. But I don't think I've added the accommodation and other
and gratuities
potential savings. Yes, the gratuities. This is going to be considered out of over, I believe it's over 70 billion or over 46 billion in terms of compensations and wages and salaries in the budget. It may be, very little or insignificant, but as the paper says, it also shows government commitment to trying to help to contribute to that particular burden share that we want. Further, the feasibility of dissolution of these ministries, we've seen examples. When the government came into power in 2016, they set up the Ministry of Special Development Initiatives. By 2020, the government had believed that ministry had achieved its particular intent and purpose, even though there are still some revenues being allocated to that particular ministry under the IPEP, but that ministry have been subsumed under other ministries, and therefore that particular feasibility is possible. One of the things that I would want to, say to support is that, as I said, even at the cabinet, not all the ministers that government have selected attend cabinet. There is a cap on how many number of ministers that can go to cabinet. Left to me, I think government and subsequent government that may come in future should note this and make sure they can select ministers up to that cabinet number or a little over that cabinet number. I don't think we need all these 86 ministers to be in power to ensure that activities and objectives are achieved. Because when it comes to the role of the minister is just playing that policy direction role. The ministries that have been set up already have administrative structures that deals with the day-to-day running of these ministries. Ministers could have advisors that have technical capabilities to advise them on certain areas that the president or the government wants to achieve or wants to push in terms of getting to achieve certain policy objectives. So having one person to lead and then probably utilizing existing structures to ensure that they also buy into your own, if not manifesto, your policy direction is very, very feasible. The benefit we get, as the paper has outlined, is the cut in some of these emoluments that have helped to save some money. ASAP did some work, I think, recently, and they focused on state-owned enterprises, particularly in the extractives. And sometimes the salary of one deputy director could pay hundreds or even thousands teachers. And so if you look at the particular salary structure, there is going to be 8 million being cut. Imagine yearly, you are going to share that with additional teachers. You can imagine the number of teachers that particular money can pay as well. So for me, I see this as very, very feasible based on the question you asked. It's really feasible. One thing that I would want to comment on that, as I said, the purpose of setting up ministries and their roles. The paper is suggesting one deputy minister for the Ministry of Finance. If you look at the Ministry of Finance, it kind of controls a lot of these policies and implement them as well. And in Ghana, we have also tried to get the Ministry of Finance playing, I would say the government financial advisor in every deal. So there is a lot of work at the Ministry of Finance. For that ministry, some ministries I would suggest you can still have 2 deputies in there, despite having all the technical advisors, because when you go into that ministries, it may sound like energy. It will be just energy. But we have petroleum, we have power, and we have other areas. And now we are talking about climate change and energy transition, which is becoming more and more prevalent or even more focused on as well. So those ones, I would say you can maintain the 2 deputies anyway. However, they have to utilize the structures within these ministries. So that I would argue that some ministries, I don't think all ministries should, on a whole, have just 1 deputy. Some ministries may have more than 1 deputy, and then those deputies can be focused on subsectors. So if you go to energy, you can have 1 focused on petroleum and 1 focused on power. But the administration and all other things can be handled by existing civil servants who have played a very important role in the development of such ministries over the years, and they built a lot of experience. The last bit that I wish any new or any additional persons who are interested in this should look at is the state-owned enterprise. The paper actually mentions it, but it doesn't go deeper. The state-owned enterprises. Government has appointed deputy directors, various deputy directors for almost all the state-owned enterprises, and you should check the SIGA reports. Despite these deputy directors, most, if not all, of all state-owned enterprises are actually running at a loss, and they are not even generating any dividends to the benefit of the government. So then where is the justification of the appointment of all these multiple deputy directors at the state-owned enterprises? And remember, these state-owned enterprises' salary structures are way significantly higher than even ministerial positions. And I think that can be a real deal of cutting budget, cutting wages and salary, which have become a burden on us. Today, if you look into the budget, if you take our interest payment out, if you take our wages and salaries out, in most cases, that consumes the domestic revenue that we collect. An effort to cut these wages and salaries, particularly at the top, will be very much welcome. So I believe we should also be looking at state-owned enterprises and how we should match the level of effort of staff appointed with the deliverable and the efficiency of that particular unit. And I guess it goes for all other ministries as well. Let me also come back to the example that Doug gave in terms of railways and other ministries that we want them dissolved or subsumed under other ministers. If, as he said, if you look at railway, for instance, railway is a project. We don't need a ministry for a project. The government had a clear policy objective in their manifesto, is to develop the railway sector in Ghana. For me, I always question myself. Maybe I may not have the answer. Why the railway from Mpakadan to Tema? What is the most economic, efficient reasoning behind why we are constructing railway from Mpakadan to Tema? Railway has always been a project, and that particular project could have a unit under the ministry with very specific focus, because under the budget, we have railway coming out from either bilateral loans or grants, or even we've gotten loans over 500 million from 2022 budget dollars coming to the railway sector. So those projects can actually be a standalone project under a ministry. Similar to what we had before, which was the Special Development Initiative. Government thought it wise that there were certain flagship programs that they wanted to focus on and make sure with the aim to reduce poverty. And I think they created a ministry for it. But now, even beyond dissolving that particular ministry, those projects are still ongoing. You, as Doc said, we've created different structures on top of existing structures, but we are not seeing the efficiency that those additional structures are generating. It is almost as if it has actually worsened the output of the existing ministries. And I think this should be something that the government should consider. We've been talking over and over, but this provides some level of options for the government to consider in a way to cut the number of ministers that we have in Ghana.
I see. All right, interesting points you raised there. So generally, you agree with the principle as captured in the report, but you would want a few modifications because, in your view, some ministries actually have a bigger portfolio like finance and energy, and they deserve 2 ministers. The report suggested that one deputy minister per ministry is fine, even though some ministries actually do not have deputy ministers. So that makes sense. How about other issues like focusing on the MDAs? We've been seeing the Auditor General's report, how there's wastage and all of that. Can't we rather focus on those areas and go a bit slowly on the bigger issues, as in the ministers, etc.? We'll look at that when we return from this break. Don't go away.
We're going very local, but we're doing local snacks. So, you know about agbili kaklo. You know, we've got some cassava in there. Some people in other parts of the world may call it yaka. We've got some coconut shavings in there as well, some onions. But I mean, if you're a fan of agbili kaklo, then today's show is for you. We're making some very interesting indigenous Ghanaian snacks. First on the menu, we have Russian bullets. What are those? In other words, agbili kaklo. And we also have peanut brittle. What do we call that? In Kati cake. It's that simple. And I have the perfect person to teach us how to make them at home on our own. Chef Tracy. Our sugar is, you know, well caramelized. So yeah, that's what the caramel looks like. Okay. Okay, so we're adding our crushed groundnuts or peanuts now. So I should just stir, Chef Tracy? Okay. So I can cut in any shape. Go ahead. This is a fun part.
So take your time and handle it with care.
Yes.
Yes.
Tender, loving care.
Exactly.
We are romancing the cassava.
You have to.
So that we get a romantic agbili kaklo.
What's Cooking is brought to you by Tasty Tom Enriched Tomato Mix. Fakakra na ayebebre.
Yeah, welcome back to the point of view. Difficult times require innovative solutions, we say. The CDD in a report is advising government to reduce the size of its government, or the size and the cost of running its government. Government should know this already, right? But why is government not doing it? There should really be something why government is not doing. The CDD is suggesting that some ministries be dissolved. Public Enterprises Ministry, for example, should be dissolved. Parliamentary Affairs Ministry should be dissolved. Railways Ministry should be dissolved. Fisheries and Aquaculture should be reintegrated with the Agric Ministry, because that's where it belongs really. Sanitation, Water Resources reintegrated with the Environment, Science and Technology Innovation Ministry. And Environment, Science, Technology, Innovation aspect can be integrated with the Ministry of Communications. In doing so, we are likely to save some 8 million or 8.5 million in annual salary or savings of ministers and their deputies. Also, we are likely to save some 1.7 million on accommodation if we did this restructuring. And also on gratuities, we are likely to save some 11 million, 11.37 million on gratuities. Gratuities would include ex gratia and those things. How about issues like what government is doing on its own already? So in January this year, government announced a 10%, a 20% cut in its discretionary expenditure. Should that not count for something? Is government not doing something already? And later on in that year, in March, I guess, government further reduced its spending by 10%, and then also put in place or announced a raft of other measures. For example, they say that they envisage that after implementing all of that, 3.5 billion will be saved, from the expenditure cuts. Some of the things they plan doing was a 50% cut in fuel coupon allocation for all political appointees and heads of government institutions, 30% cut in salaries of ministers and heads of SOEs, and a whole lot of other things. All those things put together should save the government some 3.5 billion. We don't know how far they've gone with that, but of course we can always find out. We don't know how far they've gone with that. But the point is government not? So this goes to you, Dr. Santi. Is government not showing the way by reducing its expenditure, apart from cutting down on the number of its ministers, which we all want done? Is it not showing enough, commitment to cutting down expenditure to reflect the difficulties we have in the economy?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, so it's if you recall, the 30% cut on salaries, was it salaries or expenditure?
So there's 30% cut on salaries, and there's also 30% cut on discretionary expenditure.
Yes, so it was a measure that even came it came much earlier, even before the new sort of, when the budget, for example, was read, right?
Yes.
You recall that the finance minister made this announcement, I think, some months earlier. Can anybody say that they have seen evidence of these cuts? Because first of all, if you have arrears for common fund, for instance, which was, I think, 3/4 in arrears, right? It means that you don't have the money in the first place to even do the expenditure. So how are you talking about discretion? You are exercising discretion to spend money that you don't have. I mean, that's not a cut. I mean, certainly when it comes to salaries and emoluments and things, they are always the first item for payment, right? That is like directly, it's like your first item before you get to goods and services, capital expenditure, and the rest. So the real challenge, and as Samuel said, if you look at where we are spending our money, once you take interest payments, it's really compensation, and compensation includes all of these things. One thing I want to state is that you have to realize that even this paper, and that has raises some real concerns about access to information, trying to get actual current salary and emoluments for ministers and so on is a difficult thing, right? Because this is actually based on just estimations from the Yantiamwa emoluments report, right? Which was even then an estimate, right? So certainly, if you factor in inflation, that salary is much higher now. Now, we didn't even calculate what the cost of 24-hour security means. What the cost of having a chauffeur-driven saloon car and a 4-wheel drive cost, and then because we were trying to calculate in monetary terms, in many cases we're using 20% of consolidated salary as a representation for the residential cost. But just imagine that most people do get houses when they are ministers. That comes with groundsmen, watchmen, all kinds of costs. And every time a minister travels, business class, all those things. So the cost of really keeping a minister and all of those things is much, much, much higher, right? But I do agree with someone that even though this might look like a drop in the ocean, it's really, for me, the first step, and it's also about offering leadership in a time of austerity. It's very important for government to communicate.
Yes, very well. So, yes. So, yes. So, let me get to Samuel. If we do this rationalization, scrapping ministries and doing all of that, what happens to the staff? We're talking about unemployment. What happens to the staff of these ministries? Would they have to go home, or they will have to go somewhere else? And wouldn't that be almost the same impact or effect on the wage bill? We talk about some flagship secretariats, for example, which may not be very necessary. What happens to the staff working in those secretariats? Where do they go? Do they get seconded to other ministries, which means that nothing really will happen to the wage bill as far as they are concerned? What should we be doing?
Salom, thank you for this question. And personally, I can tell you that there is a lot of underutilized, underemployed staff in government. Take one ministry, for example. If you go to a typical ministry, let's say, for example, energy, you would notice that the people who actually deliver to ensure that the ministry does its work may not be up to more than, say, 40% of the total people who have been employed at energy. And so when we said we were doing public sector reform, for most people, we thought that it was going to look at rationalization of staff, making sure people have been put in areas of positions that it kind of sync with their capabilities, expertise, and skills. Because there have been people who are at the ministries that, to be frank with you, they don't either get job to do, or they have not been offered opportunity to deliver, or they are not been, been part of the day-to-day operations of these ministries. Some of them are seconded from state-owned enterprises. Some of them, when a government come and then they don't trust you, they just throw you to the ministry. We have even heard where people go to ministry and they don't even have a desk to sit on. In addition to that, there have been certain other policies that tried or attempted to increase public sector employment. For me, I have never agreed with government programs that attempt to increase public sector employment without doing an assessment of existing people who have been employed and to know whether there is a need for additional persons to be employed.
Very well.
And look, these are ramping up the cost in these ministries. For the recommendations that have been provided in the paper, there is, I think, this is where we have to look at, because already under the IMF program, it is likely as we succeed, we are going to have a freeze on additional employment, meaning we can only replace people who are going on retirement. But there is a need for staff rationalization, whereby we will reallocate staff into positions that they can offer their best at. And I don't think we should just be throwing people around. Let me comment on this.
We're actually running out of time, so do that in 2 seconds.
Okay. Quickly, at the start of the national policy that wanted to reallocate people who have not been unemployed, which have been discontinued now, my view, which I expressed, was if this was going to help the private sector, then if you allocate somebody to a private sector for 2 years, the person would have developed the skills, and it would be very difficult for the private sector would let the person go once business is going well. There was no need to reallocate people in government because there was already enough persons, we had enough staff in government already. It just came to ramp up expenditure, and it didn't really generate any efficiency. So I think these things, we can just have a proper rationalization, not in the face of it, saying we are doing staff rationalization and we keep on employing more whilst we know there are no spaces for them.
Very well. All right. Thank you so much. Samuel Bekwe, Executive Director, Center for Extractives and Development Africa. And also thank you so much, Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante. He co-authored a document we looked at today, Proposals for Reducing the Size and Cost of Running Government. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Selom Adunu. I sat in for Bernard Avile. Catch you some other time. Have a good evening.